As we have discussed, advertising is ubiquitous and effective. It is almost everywhere, and it is everywhere because it seems to work. And so advertising sells more than just products and services. It also leads to the socialization, the maintenance, and even the creation of our identities. And so, through advertisements and through these rhetorical artifacts, which are texts, we are socialized to be certain ways and influenced to uphold certain values. Advertising creates and maintains our cultural tastes, informs us of what is popular, what is celebrated, and what is important in society in terms of objects, material items, identity constructions, and things that we might buy and consume. Oftentimes, advertising stretches these cultural norms, and so advertising simultaneously maintains cultural norms while seemingly attempting to transgress or break down some of our cultural norms in favor for a stretched or hyperbolic or even an audacious sentiment within society. But still, within most advertising texts, you can find these tried and true cultural assumptions. And as we talked about with syllogistic argumentation, usually these aren't objective truths, but more so cultural agreements. And so you can see these cultural agreements challenged, stretched, but oftentimes, more often than not, just simply maintained and reinforced. And we can find these most readily in gendered constructions, which are uh, peppered through and permeate many advertisements. Indeed, this is a part of society, and we don't really see anything outlandish or hyperbolic about a lot of these texts because we have already been enculturated with these gendered constructions that oftentimes produce binary constructions in terms of gendered identity. And so, gendered social constructions in advertisement, we often see women portrayed as natural, sexual, or passive. And so, here we have an ad that does almost all three of these just in one snapshot. Women as objects is oftentimes seen in advertising, or women near objects intended to sell the object. But what is going on here when we see women as an object is simply dehumanization or objectification. And we might hear this term get thrown around in daily conversation and not find too much wrong with it, objectification. But if we look deeper into the word, objectification is to dehumanize someone and to remove their human agency and to look at them as an object. And when we think about it in that context, it can be quite damaging. And so we also see a disambiguation oftentimes, more often than not, of the female body, removing certain body parts, and oftentimes just leaving out certain body parts, oftentimes the head um, of people, mostly women, in advertisements. We might just see this as a sexist form of advertisement, or we just might see it as a natural offshoot of a patriarchal society. Either way, we can see it in many instances in advertisement. And we might be able to locate these instances. Another one that is pervasive is license withdrawal. So we see a kind of a blank stare oftentimes in a female's face that is gazing off into the distance and not really looking at any specific focal point. The male here has the agency. The male's gaze here from feminist theory here is always sees the side of a woman's face. And we see this exemplified perfectly in this ad for cologne or perfume. The female here is unavailable, spaced out, if you will, but also dependent on the man who is in the dominant position here. And so in these ads, we can read gender constructions, and we can also go so far as to read social inequalities that exist in the material realities. Now, once again, continually, what comes first, the text or the reality, the symbol or the material? Change one, you change the other. Body clowning. We often see this as another element of sexism in advertising. We often see women in unserious gestures and postures, and poses. And so we see a little bit of that here. Flamboyant, exaggerated poses that are less serious. Meanwhile, men, even in comical situations, tend to be featured alone and also tend to be assuming a confident, serious posture. And so men are oftentimes portrayed as powerful, free, and also solitary. And this, once again, just reflects real power inequalities. And we might look at this from a feminist perspective. And what does this do to constantly view men as on their own, as individuals? And so what this does is remove females once again from the public sphere or even other people. And so everybody is hindered by power inequalities and the power inequality that is a product of the patriarchal society. We can see that here. And so men, from having to try to live up to these portrayals of rugged individualism, often might engage in solitary, isolating behavior, also behavior that might be risky in some way. And so this ad, of course, would not strike us as odd in our society. But we can look deeper and see some of the narratives, some of the myths that are being furthered through advertising stories and narratives that are contained in advertising. And so we see that here, that rugged individualism, as we see a male, once again, alone up to their own devices here and without the help of others. From a feminist perspective, we might remember that all men came from a woman at some point, and a woman was almost always present in a man's life in some way. But if you looked at advertising, we rarely see this. We usually see the man on their own. And so certain archetypes and concerning identity are created. And so here's the Marlboro Man, which still exists today as an archetype and as a powerful identity construction. If we go throughout the years from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s to now, the Marlboro Man is depicted alone. And endowed with a rugged, individualistic responsibility. And so I encourage you to take a look at advertisements. You don't have to look far, just Google advertisements. Google your favorite brand or a popular brand or material items and take a look at the narratives that are constructed and the mythos that are maintained, or these societal myths that create our cultural norms and our societal agreements. You might ask yourself, what values are being promoted? How are people socialized? And every speck and color and text and image and posture and likeliness and portrayal is deliberately constructed with a rhetorical purpose. Get you to think highly about the product or the service being sold, and to even go out there and change your living and consuming habits, creating enough space in your personal life to buy this product based on the myth that is being portrayed. And so, once again, we see relative size here in terms of gender. We also see the subordinate and dominant position here. We see a little bit of disambiguation with the man, but we see the concentration on the male genitalia. And so, once again, this patriarchal notion that most experiences are funneled through the male condition. What meaning are objects given? And so take a look at ads and attempt to recognize the meanings that objects are given. And so ads entail the transfer of meaning to objects. And so, so many things are just gendered in our society. We have the red, the blue, and the yellow M&M are depicted as male in M&M advertisements. But the one, and lo and behold, it is the green M&M because the green is synonymous with nature, right? And then woman is also become synonymous with nature. Uh, Here is a female or depicted as a female. And so the female M&M here is not only natural, somewhat passive in her mannerisms, but also sexualized with the high heels. And so objects, colors, words, and bodies, and cartoon characters, candy, and even snacks are gendered. And gendered according to a binary structure, right? That also hinders folks on both sides of the binary, and especially those that might not fit into these binary constructions. And so, goldfish, the beloved snack, is comes in two forms: the masculine here with a cool pair of sunglasses, and the feminine with a pink crown depicted as a princess. So we can hark back to some of those texts that we talked about previously in Disney films, and that archetype of the princess female archetype. And so we might also think about the space in between. What is lost with that space in between, as Derrida and Foucault suggest through deconstruction and other literary methods, where we recognize that the space in between is a symbolic valley where nothing really is allowed to be. But of course, people are born every year that are identified as male, female, or intersex. But if you look at our symbolic discourse, there's not much room in between the symbolic binaries in terms of sex and gender in this case. And there is just no real reason to continue to gender almost everything in our lives. And so we also might think about ethnicity and the roles that race and ethnicity and power play. And so advertisements create powerful emotional appeals or pathos that address our needs. And advertisements do small turns of phrase and oftentimes trademark phrases and entire words or copyright phrases or words to mean something new in relation to the societal context or structural norms. And so Taco Bell's live más, it means what? Doesn't mean live more, because if it was live more, it would just be live more. And that might be trademarked or copyright, but it's not that. It's live más. And when you are living más, you are experiencing the space and the excitement that Taco Bell's cuisine has to offer. And so, once again, a lifestyle is being sold. And you can see within the ethnic and racial constructs, live más means something a little bit extra now than live more. It's somewhat similar to that Corona commercials that we looked at in the previous lecture. And so fear, appeals of fear. I encourage you to take a look at ads, locate ads, and try to locate an ad that engages in a fear of the unwanted. Advertising caters into our fears, but our fears are often perpetuated by societal agreements that are furthered through numerous texts. Advertising is just one arm of our symbolic and textual discourse. And of course, there are many iterations of this discursive arm. And so, self repair, what do I need to fix in my life? And there's always something to fix, right? Of course, we can always get better. But there isn't always something wrong, but advertising will encourage you to think that something is wrong, and you should fill that void with a product, perhaps, or a service. Guilt, shame, isolation, and loneliness, right, will all be fixed in a small way based on the product or service being offered. And so, take a look at this ad. It looks like a king cobra snake here, or rattlesnake that is dangerous in some way, but it seemingly is a plug. And so, the the threat of outdated technology. And so you need wireless technology to be free. And there's implications here of the technological divide and being able to exist and excel and be successful because you were on the right side of the technological divide here, seemingly with wireless technology. And so you fear being left in the dust and using outdated technology. Self-preservation and sex appeal are rampant as well. The celebration of certain bodily types, the celebration of youth, and the appeal to sexuality are pervasive in advertisements. And so, self-preservation to secure your survival might be something that is an indelible need. Since we largely live in a socially constructed world, that need to be have your identity and your successfulness affirmed by others and negotiate that social landscape now might be much more powerful than that ability to fend for yourself and acquire your own food. And so you can see how you need to do that through social means now. And so now we need social acceptance in order to survive, to gain people's attention and define our roles. And so once again here, we have the solitary male. Although the male might be slightly sexualized, he is still very serious. His gaze is not the license withdrawal. It's directed at the camera, and he has power and agency compared to some of those examples of body clowning and license withdrawal that we showed earlier. And so transformative appeals, the appeals to power. And so by doing this or buying this, I will now have power. And so we can see this power symbol here with an energy drink. I will just have power. I think this is a nice example to denote the generalized notion of getting and receiving power, accessing power through certain products, and how that message is deployed, or that myth, that story is deployed through advertising. I encourage you to go find economic appeals to power, physical appeals to power, and political appeals to power. And so lastly, try to find an ad and locate an appeal to power, social and economic. Also try to locate an ad that appeals to fear, guilt specifically, and self-repair. Thank you.